6:30. Everybody agree? Okay, let's get the meeting started. Welcome to the April 26, 2020 session of the Oxford, Ohio Board of Zoning Appeals. First item on the agenda is that we have to have approval of our March 22nd, 2022 minutes of the regular meeting. So moved. Thank you. Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Without opposition, the minutes are approved. Third item on the agenda is old business, which is BZA 2020-04 for 36 East High Street and examination of egress door with respect to variance approval of Sky Deck, and Mark Wiseman is the applicant. Before we get started on this, because this is a very unique type of hearing tonight, I'd like to go through a few things so that everybody understands what my thoughts are on how to handle this. And, Mr. Connors, you're welcome to jump in at any point. First off, we're not going to have a full board tonight. We knew that going in. Kate Raminier is not here, so you're going to be dealing with a 4-member board.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Since I was not on the board at the time that the original request occurred, I would like to recuse myself.
Thank you. I appreciate your honesty. That puts a new wheel on the wagon, Mr. Briggs. You now have a 3-member board. It takes 3 votes to pass any motion before this board. Would you like to proceed with the hearing tonight, or would you like to table it?
Well, go ahead and proceed.
Okay, let the record show that Mr. Riggs has chosen to proceed. Tonight's hearing is not a normal variance, and let me back up one step. I appreciate your honesty. You can stay where you are, if you cannot participate in any way, or you can take a seat in the audience, whichever you're most comfortable with, and I have no preference.
I'll stay.
Okay, that's fine. Anyhow, not a normal hearing. We're not going to rehear the original case. The most closely comparable type of hearing that we've got is administrative appeal, and this is not even that. We're being asked to review the conditions of a previously granted variance. I think that what we're going to do, because we're not going to rehear the case, is that we'll treat it very similarly to an administrative appeal. And what I mean by that is that we will swear in the witnesses, have testimony, have questions and answers, and then have Mr. Riggs give his testimony. We'll have questions and answers there. After the conclusion of that, we're going to reconvene into regular session, just as we normally do. And that'll be the opportunity for us to have a discussion between the board members and make a motion determinant of this case. One thing that I'd like to do is that if we have questions during our regular session, I'd like to have you ask me to recognize you. Before you ask your question, the reason I'm doing that is that staff and legal counsel have a microphone at their table and they can respond from there without having to return to the podium. However, Mr. Riggs, while he's still under oath, I'd like to have him approach the podium before he asks your question so that when he responds, his response is adequately recorded. Let's see, got my cheat sheet. There's 3 possible outcomes of the hearing tonight, and they've been offered as part of our package. We'll have an opportunity to discuss those and make a motion and then vote. These outcomes can be modified as part of the motion. Additionally, the motion can stipulate a time point for completion of the motion, such as forthwith or within a definite finite time, using 30 days as an example. Mr. Connor, do you have anything that you'd like to add before we begin?
Well, I would say that Mr. Wiseman had raised some issues before the meeting tonight over the past few weeks about his belief that Ms. Rumiere had bias and therefore she should recuse herself from listening to any case that was presented on that basis involving Brick Street. I responded back and indicating that there was no conflict of interest. Perceived bias is not grounds to force recusal of someone. Even though Ms. Ruminaire is not here tonight, that's not the reason she is not here is not related to that request. So I would simply like the minutes to reflect that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Connor, do you agree with what I've outlined in terms of procedure for this?
I think it's logical. Yes.
Okay. Very good. I need a motion to enter into adjudication. Thank you, Chris. Roger, you second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Without opposition, we are in adjudication. Please state your name and title for the record, please.
Sam Perry, Community Development Director for City of Oxford.
And raise your right hand for me. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
Yes, I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the overview. That's very helpful. This case is not a variance and not an appeal, but there are some similarities in procedures. It is as Mr. Chair said, this is a review of a condition of a prior variance approval. So I'll go back through some of that history, and some of these things will be somewhat redundant, just to help to in the slides, just to help to kind of clarify or reconfirm kind of what I've already said, just to help a little bit because of the sequence. So 36 East High Street, it's the Brick Street Bar and Restaurant, and I will say that Mr. Bob Ricks is here as well on behalf of Mark Wiseman, the business owner, and he was the architect and designer for the project when it originally came before this board in July of 2020. Waiting for it to wake up here. So at the corner of Poplar and High Street is the property that I think you all are familiar with, so I won't dwell on that. And then the zoning is the Uptown Zoning District. This is a recent photograph that shows the finished product, and so pay attention to this slide because the next slide will show the previous condition prior to the variance approval. So you can see on this slide the one-story nature of the outdoor patio, and what we're talking about tonight that is being requested is actually in this location on this wall. So I'll go back to that previous slide, and you can see there's a door there, which is the nature of one of the conditions of the variance approval from July of 2020, which was actually extended. It came back to Board of Zoning Appeals for an extension because the project had not gotten underway. So this is actually the third time this case has been in front of Board of Zoning Appeals. And then the photo at the bottom is the same thing, just from a slightly different angle. There was a condition of the side and front yard setback variance that there would not be an egress door between the interior of the building and the sky deck. So here's the fun stuff here with the sequence. A little bit that you've had exposure to. This is the same information that was in your packet. The majority of this are things that have been handled outside this board, but we wanted you to have an overview of the sequence. So you can see at the beginning when it was originally submitted to staff to be put on the agenda back in June of 2020. The sequence actually resulted in a Historic and Architectural Preservation Commission review prior to the Board of Zoning Appeals review. And then there was an approval with a condition from the HAPC as well. And then later on in the month of July, that was when the setback variance was approved with the condition, which I'll touch on here in a moment. A couple conditions, one had to do with the railing height, one with the egress door. And then the building permit was submitted a couple of months later in September. There was a revision made that required a review by the Historic Commission. There was a bar that was added to the sky deck, The variance expired then in January. The building permit was actually issued even after the variance expired. So all those revisions, that was an internal administrative process. Those did result in approval of the building permit. And then in March, the staff notified the owner that the work could not start because there are two attributes required in order for the variance to still be valid. That has to do with the time frame of 6 months and also work commencing. So that was void, so they did come back for an extension, which was granted then in April. And then from our records, there was progress in June of last year to get the construction underway. And then a couple months later, in August, there was a final inspection that passed without the door, which is what's being discussed tonight. Staff observed that. We did notify the owner. The building official eventually issued what's called an Adjudication Order, which is an instrument to require compliance from the building official. So this was not a zoning order. This was a building official order, because anytime there's a door in a commercial building, any kind of alteration like that, that affects potentially safety and flow of the occupants of the building. For safety purposes, there needs to be a building permit done for that. So the building official did issue that adjudication order, and then the architect applied for a permit for that door on behalf of Mr. Wiseman. And as part of that, there are reviews that are done by building official, fire chief, zoning administrator, and the zoning code review, which was included in your packet, was one of those, and that was where that condition was pointed out, that the zoning code review for the building permit could not be found compliant because of the condition in staff's view. And several months later, after many emails, the architect did submit a request to be placed on this agenda. There was an effort to allow it to be done administratively, and eventually we did gain agreement from the owner that this needed to be determined by BZA, that there would be a clarification as to what the reason for the condition was, to determine whether this door would comply with that condition. So I've got the wording of this condition here, which is the condition 2. Condition 1 is not really the subject of tonight's discussion. And the condition reads, there will be no egress from the inside of the building to the outside deck, thus limiting to just the 2 stairways. And I'll be happy to go back to that slide, but I did want to backtrack just a little bit on the support within the code for conditions of approval, because this was actually a setback variance to add the second level to the deck, because anytime there was to the patio, anytime there's an expansion of a prior, and there was a variance to the prior patio roof system, but anytime there's an expansion, either horizontally or vertically, there has to be a new variance submitted, and that's what occurred in 2020. So that allowed the structure to be built with no setback from the right-of-way. And the code support for attaching those conditions, you'll see here, the Board of Zoning Appeals. This is straight out of the Oxford Code, Oxford Zoning Code. The BZA shall grant with conditions, or deny a variance application as presented, and shall clearly state the findings upon which its decision is based. Board of Zoning Appeals shall base its decision only upon the decision standards in this chapter. In its decision, the Board of Zoning Appeals may waive or modify dimensional regulations of the zoning code or impose more strict regulations and any additional conditions, guarantees, and safeguards it deems necessary to satisfy the purposes of the zoning code. So it's another way of saying the same thing. It is within your power to attach conditions to variances. And then this follows up on, in that same chapter in 1139, that it is our job as staff to not issue any permits that would not comply with the orders of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And our focus in following up on enforcement and requiring that this would not be allowed to continue without a remedy is the final sentence here. Any action that exceeds a granted variance shall constitute a violation of the zoning code. So I want to point out that this is not an appeal of the staff's decision, because there was a willingness to submit the letter asking for clarification. And so since that is there, that is what you have in front of you tonight, is to discuss that wording. Just for a little bit more history, I wanted to show you the renderings that were submitted. So this is not actual photographs, but this is what was submitted at the time, the July 2020 review. And you can see that's what was built, with the exception of the bar and the door. Those are alterations that were determined to be within the scope, except for the door. The bar was determined to be within the scope of the setback variance. Floor plans that were submitted, you can see it's clear that there was no door shown, no bar shown, and this is the lower level, so that's not the door at question. Same thing here, street view from Popper Street, you can see there's no opening shown. This is just the structure of the deck itself. And then the current condition photos, which you've seen already, those are in the original part of my presentation. And then the floor plans, these are actually in your packet. They're also part of the building permit that is still on hold, pending the outcome of this review. And you can see here the door that's shown, which is being requested. So these are the plans that the building official and the fire chief and the zoning administrator would review as part of the normal administrative process. But because of the condition, it was not allowed to proceed. The building official could go ahead and render an approval for just their element, and so could the fire chief, but the zoning administrator would not be able to, so therefore the permit could not be issued for that door to allow to continue to exist. And then the elevation drawings, you can see that clearly here for the doorway. And I'm not going to go into, I'll back up to the wording of the condition. I'll just touch on the reasoning, which there was a letter in the packet about the use of the door. It was the owner's determination that it would be helpful for staff to move through the door for accessing the upper level without using the exterior stairs, but they would be using the interior stairs to access the sky deck. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions you might have. And again, Mr. Bob Riggs is here as well.
Thank you, sir. Well done. We appreciate your thoroughness. Is there any questions from the board, Mr. Ames?
Yes. On the drawings to show the new door, did the original application have that door in it, or was it blank? 'Cause we have to do with, we don't have the old.
I'm sorry, yes. That is correct. There was not a door shown on the original application, either in the building permit or in front of this board.
Okay.
Chris?
You said this went through review with the fire marshal. Was there any mention that the door was required?
No.
I've got a couple of questions. You mentioned emails between you and Mr. Wiseman. Do you happen to know when those emails started that were relative to this door? An approximate date?
They were all between our discovery of it and this meeting.
And as I remember, your discovery was October 14th of last year, is that right?
It was August 14th.
August 14th. Okay, thank you. There was a mention in the packet from our building administrator about $500 OBC fine. Just to clarify to the board, what does OBC stand for?
Ohio Building Code.
Okay. And our local chief building official is authorized to enforce that code?
Correct.
Okay. Let's see here. To the best of your knowledge, we've got a potential fine from OBC violation. Is there a stipulation in the Oxford Code for a fine for violation of the zoning?
Yes, there is.
Do you happen to know anything about that? Could you explain it to us just a little bit?
There's a general fine for 1129 violation of zoning code on administration for not obtaining permits, and it's a Class D, $500 as well. There's also a minor misdemeanor penalty, which is a criminal violation. So the city would not be able to use both of those, but could choose which one to remedy the situation if it came to that.
Okay, the $500 fine you mentioned, is that a one-time?
It is, and then if it's resolved, then there would not be additional fines. If it's not resolved, then it would double.
Okay. I'm interested in the delay between October of last year and March of this year relative to the door. It was very quickly discovered that a door had been put in within 72 hours of the final inspection, as I saw in the package. Do you have any explanation why there was a 5-month delay in going from October to March? Was this just communication back and forth and the delay because of that?
Yes.
Okay.
There was a lot of communication, but there was a significant unwillingness to actually come back to this board for a review. So I think our desire was to not use enforcement mechanisms. That's typically our approach. So we extended as much patience as we could, and this was our last effort, this meeting, and then we would be moving to administrative enforcement.
You said unwillingness. Are you saying unwillingness on the part of the city staff or on the part of the owner?
On the part of the owner.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Either one of you have anything else?
Good point.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Riggs, are you going to present for Mr. Wiseman?
Yes, sir.
Step to the podium, please. State your name and title for the record,
Bob Riggs, pre-construction manager at Conger Construction Group.
and raise your right hand for me. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and matters before this board.
Yes, I do.
Please proceed.
Okay. So, as I said, my name is Bob Riggs. We were hired by Mr. Wiseman as a design build contractor for this project about a year before we actually started the construction. So going through the process, we understood going through HAPC, also understood going through BZA would be the process to get this project built and get it built correctly. And there was no understanding from the owner or from us that there would be any way to circumvent that. We just want to go through the correct process. So we filed for the HAPC, we filed for BZA, went through both of those processes. And then the two conditions that are up on the screen about the handrail and also the means of egress were conditions on BZA set aside to be able to build this structure. So in those two pieces, we agreed to that and built the project based on those two conditions. The rail is 4 foot 8 inches tall. It sits on top of two steel beams to create toe kicks. The means of egress was also built with no means of egress as part of the project. We finished the construction of the project the first week of August, allowed the owner to go ahead and get the bar set up, get the bar built, and start opening the project in mid-August. During that process, Mark came to us and asked if we could put a staff access door on the one side of the construction, as you saw in the picture. Once you realize that with the bar up on top on the second floor, to be able to access that and bring product to and from that bar, to bring glassware or other items to and from that bar, it made it a lot easier to come up through that staff door into the second floor instead of going down the exterior 2 stairs, going through the patio, coming in from the outside into the building. So we did the door for him with the methodology that it's not a means of egress door, as the stipulation states. A means of egress door would be that the door has panic hardware on the inside. It has an exit sign on the inside that alerts people to go to that door to exit the building. This door is not built with any of those characteristics. It's built with a locked handle on the inside and the outside no sign that it's an exit door, and a sign on both sides of the door that says this is a staff access door only, for employees only. So that being the case, it was under our assumption and the owners that did not fall under the means of egress stipulation, where the BZA was requesting that there would not be people running out that door and to have access out that door onto the sky deck to use those 2 exterior stairs to get out of the building. The door is locked 99% of the time and only used when staff need to come in and out of the building to refresh the bar area on the upper level or take trash back into the building to take it to get rid of it. So that being the case, then when it was notified to us that the door was having to go back through this process, the delay from that time until 4 or 5 months later was the owner and us going back and forth requesting that this be an administrative process because we didn't feel that this was that it felt under the number 2 requirement that it was a means of egress, because there's nothing about this door that if you look at OBC under means of egress stipulates all the items I said before, and we didn't meet any of those requirements. So we were trying to get this as an administrative issue. We didn't think it needed to go back to the BZA. And then it kept going on, and we decided, okay, we'll come back, state the case, show that why it's there, give the reasons for it, why it was done as part of a separate permit process and not done as part of the project. It was never intended to be part of the project. It was never even thought to be part of the project. Like I said, after we finished, the realization came into play that there needed to be access in and out from that upstairs area to help with the access of the bar that was allowed on the 2nd floor, and that's when we went ahead and installed the door with the lock on both sides. And it's staffed from the exterior each night that it's in operation. So with that, we feel as an ownership group and a design build entity that we haven't strayed from the variance approval, and would like the approval to keep the door there as a staff access door in the manner that it's used today, is not a means of egress, but just access in and out for employees to service the upper area of the sky deck. That's all.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Reed?
Yes.
Please go ahead, Roger.
Were there no staff going up and down the outside steps when you originally approached the board for the zoning appeal?
When we first approached for the appeal, there was not a bar upstairs in
Were
the
there
design.
no staff going up and down the stairs was my question.
There were security staff going up and down the stairs, yes.
And serving staff?
No serving staff, no. Everything was served from the inside of the building.
But there was staff.
There was security going up and down the building, but not serving staff.
Thank you.
Correct.
You have anything? Early in your presentation, you made a comment about going through the process and knowing what the process was. I'd like to know why you didn't attempt that same process to get this door. We waited 6 months approximately from the time you opened it to the time that you sent a letter to the city asking them to come back to this board. You had an opportunity, in my opinion, that you could have complied with a known procedure. You complied with it before. Why did you choose not to comply?
Well, in our terms, we were attempting to do that process by submitting a new permit application for the door. We submitted a new application to get a building permit for the use of the door by how we considered the door being used, and submitted that application to Building and Zoning to get the permit for the door after it was installed. And then that's when we were realized, and it was brought to our attention, that from an administrative standpoint, that was pushing it under this condition number 2, which called it out as an egress door, which we never intended it to be, it was never meant to be, and it was never planned to be an egress door. So that's why there was a delay, and from the very beginning to get to this point, we attempted to go through the process of getting it permitted as it was meant to be, and then as that permit was returned back to us saying, this needs to go back to the BZA, that's when we started the conversation of getting it done administratively, and then if it didn't get done administratively, come back to the BZA board.
So you built the door without the permit, and then went after the permit after the door was built?
We built the door in the construction of the project, realized from Building and Zoning that the door based on that had to be permitted, and we filed the permit for it.
As I read number 2, I don't see any sign of egress door in that requirement. I see in action of egressing the building.
Correct. And if you look
So
up,
those aren't the same thing.
Right.
An egress door is a specific thing. Moving between the inside and the outside is something totally different.
correct. And if I could say that in the Ohio Building Code, if you look up egress, egress is leaving the building through that opening. You're not leaving the building from that opening, you're passing from one side to the other for a specific purpose. You're not exiting the building to leave the
Understand.
property.
Rob, do you have any?
In the, reviewing the minutes of the original meeting and watching the tape a couple of different times, I specifically asked Mr. Wiseman about the egress door, a door being their egress door. He stated, using his words from the notes and from the video, that he had at one time thought about it and looked at it from a perspective that was only going to be the 2 stairs. Then when he wrote the letter to the board and to the staff, 4th paragraph says, BCA made a curious request. And then later in the same paragraph, it made an odd request. We didn't make any request at all. We made a determination that there was a condition to be put on it. To me, that condition still stands.
In what
The
regard
door
do
is
you
the
think?
door. If that door would have been up there, you wouldn't have your variance right now. It would have gone down 3 to 2 because I was voting.
In what regard do you see that door being an egress door?
It's a door. People go in and out of it. That's egress.
But it's people are
It's
not
a door.
people are not
People
permitted to
in
go
and out
through
of
it because it's a
That's
locked
egress.
because it's a locked door. It's not egressable.
Staff's
Egressable.
not gonna go in and out of it?
Staff will, yes,
That's people.
but the general public no.
That's an egress.
And that's what
door,
OBC
in
is
my
saying.
humble opinion.
Okay.
Excuse me, do you have anything else? You made a comment about the Ohio Building Code and that this does not fall under their terminology of egress. That section and the actual verbiage of that was not Mr. Wiseman's letter. Can you give us an explanation of what OBC means in terms of egress?
A means of egress is a way that identifies a pathway for patrons in the building to exit the building in an emergency. So if there's an emergency in the building and people need to exit that building, there's a pathway defined by exit signs, and there's a door or a means of egress out that people can go through, even if the door were to be locked. There's a panic bar, some mechanism on the inside to get out of the building. If there's a fire, if there's a tragedy of some kind of emergency that'll get you out of that building safely. This door has none of those items. There's no sign to tell you that it's an exit door. There's no panic bar to tell you that you can open the door at any time. It's not lit to show you that there's a door there, which is another requirement of OBC. So none of those requirements are part of this door. It is strictly a door to be able to get staff back and forth in a manner to be able to access the bar area in both the 2nd floor and the sky deck.
Let me read you something, see if you agree with it. This is from OBC Chapter 2, Section 202, which is definitions. Under means of egress, a continuous and unobstructed path, vertical and horizontal egress travel from any occupied portion of a building or structure to a public way. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
It says it consists of 3 aspects. Exit access, that portion of a means of egress that leads from any occupied portion of a building or structure to an exit. Would you agree with that?
I agree with what you're saying, but I don't agree that this is an exit.
This doesn't say anything about panic bars, it doesn't stipulate who's using the door.
I understand, but it does say exit. An exit is
And
a totally
exit
different
is a
term.
door.
Not in that term of it being an exit. It is not stated as an exit, and it never was meant to be stated as an exit.
Okay, let's say that we've got a tragedy and people are trying to get out of there.
Mhm.
And Do you think it's unreasonable that people would mistake that locked door for a means of exiting the building?
No, if you're going down the stairs, there's no light on the door to show you that it's a door.
In an emergency situation, is it reasonable to think they're gonna try and get out any door?
In an emergency situation, the owner would open that door to allow it to be out because that's what you would do in a safety, in an emergency situation.
Is that action permitted by fire code to the best of your knowledge?
I don't know to my knowledge.
Okay. When was this door purchased? Approximately.
Second week of August,
So just before the final building inspection.
it would have purchased, we finished the first week of August, and then it would have been the second week of August as the bar was being installed when the owner was doing their final FF&E portion of the project.
Okay. Give me a moment to review my notes, please.
I'll ask another question then.
Go ahead, Robert.
When the bar was installed, was the owner aware that the variance for the building did not allow a door up there?
An egress door, yes.
I go back to point out, this does not say egress door, and the discussion at the meeting clearly was not looking at the fire exit. It was in the use of the space. And the fact that the sky deck was an extension of the outside piece, not an extension of the service within the building. And clearly, you're sticking to egress door, and egress door is not what our discussion was about, not what we put the variance condition on.
And I think there might have been,
It's just misleading.
I don't think it's misleading, and I think there might have been some misunderstanding that the variance for the patio on the first floor, there are 4 direct access doors from the interior of the building to the existing patio.
Right. And what we were doing was saying that's the service that's being provided, not another service from the second level.
Well, it was taken that egress from that terminology.
I understand how you interpreted it, but that was not our intent.
That was the intent of what the owner took from that condition.
You have anything else?
No, not quite.
Nothing? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. Since Mr. Wiseman is not here, and there's no one else here to testify for the applicant, would we like to move out of adjudication back into regular session?
So moved.
Thank you, sir.
Second.
Second, and all in favor say aye. Aye. Without opposition, we are back in regular session. Discussion or motion?
I'm not sure.
In what? In making a motion?
Well, or in having discussion.
We can have an open discussion between us, just as we do in the other case.
I haven't been convinced that there's a need to change anything, which would take number 3 off the list.
And when you say no need to change anything, are you saying no need to change what we originally stipulated in the variance?
Correct.
Thank you.
The door, in my mind, the way we intended the word egress to work, what it was supposed to mean, number 1 is off the table as well, in my mind, because it is in conflict with what we intended.
Okay.
Right.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, but my direct question to Mr. Wiseman during the original meeting was about egress for purposes of having, how many people you're gonna have on that lobby. When there's a door available, more people are gonna come in and out of it. To me, it was a safety factor then, it's a safety factor now. I don't want to go there.
Well, we can split hairs about who is coming out the door, whether it's staff or people. But the point is that, at least as I understand it, egress means to leave a structure, a building, venue, something of that sort. So whether it's staff or patrons, they are leaving the building. That
So
makes
people
it,
leaving the building.
to my mind, without even getting into splitting it into the minutia of an emergency exit versus a staff door, I still see it a means of egress in that building. And that is not what we intended. Further discussion? I need a motion from one of you.
I kind of like Chris, what's the proper motion?
Well, maybe we should ask Mr. Connor that.
Mr. Conner, what's the proper motion in a case like this?
Well,
Good ground for me.
let me, I have to parse this out in my brain too, okay? I think that, well, frankly, what I think about your deliberations isn't relevant to the record. They're your deliberations, but obviously the focus has been on what the definition of egress is, and I think the record has reflected what everyone, how people view that. So the question would be, if there's a belief that this door was not intended with the original variance request, then you have to make, I think, a motion to make a finding, whether it is or it isn't. Then from that decision, you have to determine whether or not, number three, whether or not the BZA wants to revise or remove that condition, which could include, in theory, that would cause the need to remove the door entirely. So essentially, we're kind of, as I see it, and I don't know how Mr. Perry, what he was thinking when he drafted this, but again, as I'm interpreting what he wrote there, and I think he's right, that you still have the ability to make a decision on whether or not to allow the door to exist.
Okay.
Sam, I don't know if that was your intent or not.
Well, I think there's a consensus among the board members that the door is not intended as part of a variance. So I think that it's now a situation of how do we make a finding. To do it properly for the record, should there be a motion to make a finding, or should we just go directly to a motion?
I would encourage you in this case to make do a motion and make a specific factual finding on that issue.
Good. And as chair, I cannot make that motion.
I will make that motion.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Haynes.
I move that BZA 2020-04 in regard to the variance that was allowed, 1143.10C2. It was not the intent of this board to allow a door on the upper floor. Changes have been made and planned since we first looked at it. We still do not believe the door should be there. Under number 3, we will not remove the condition from this variance.
Thank you, sir. Would you agree with that?
I'll second.
You'll second. Thank you. Roll call vote on that, and then a motion? Or voice vote?
Well, I'm hearing the two findings. One, that was not, that the door was not part of the original request. And then the second part of that, Mr. Ames, was that the door would need to be removed based upon the first finding.
Yes.
Chris, would you agree with that?
Yes.
I agree with that also. Do we need to have a motion and a roll call vote?
Yes, but I believe Mr. Allison did second
You did?
the original motion of Mr. Ames, so you can do the roll call now.
We'll do a roll call vote. The motion's been made and seconded. A yes vote will affirm Roger's motion and therefore require removal of the door. Would you like to put any stipulations on that removals
As soon as possible.
forthwith?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Motion's been, and do you agree with that time stipulation on the second? I agree with it also. Therefore, we have a motion that the door be removed, and that our intent and that was not to have a door on the second floor at all. A yes vote affirms the motion and requires the removal of the door forthwith. that work?
Yes.
Thanks, thanks, sir. Mr. Perry, roll call vote.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Mr. Snipper?
Yes. Vote is 3-0, the doors to be removed forthwith. Okay, we've got, one other item on the agenda. You say we do not have a case in May?
Correct.
Okay. Well then, I think we're done for this evening. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is adjourned. Thanks to all of you.